You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, you got a bunch of us together today. We got Cosmic Peach with us tonight. What is going today? Cosmic Peach, Julia, what is going on? How are you?
What's up, Nick? I'm actually so thrilled to be here. I'm like fangirl right now because I love Old World Florida. I mention his show all the time. So thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Of course, of course. And we got my man, the Headless Giant. Thanks to him, he gave me the courage to hit up Dr. Longo and ask him to come on. So Headless Giant, let everybody know what's going on. And you're, oh, sorry, I muted you by accident. My bad. There we go.
So you can find me on my YouTube channel, The Headless Giant. We do the occult mailbag. If you want to check us out or send an email, you can email me at headlessgiantpodcast@gmail.com, and we will read your weird experiences on the air.
Hell yeah. Thank you very much. And today we also got joining us Ricardo. He's another mad scientist that I consider. And I appreciate all his info that he can bring to the show. And we wanted to have him on today with us, especially with Dr. Longo. So, Ricardo, please let everybody know what your deal is. And it looks like you're muted as well. There you go. I think you are muted, Ricardo. There you go.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me again. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. I'm thrilled to learn about what Dr. Longo has to tell us. And I might have a question or two for him. As for my thing, if for those that don't know, I do various types of research. I've been doing so for 35 years, more or less. And I'm strongly associated with the Institute for Natural Philosophy that is just borning this week, I hope, as a 501c3 at last. So our work is about to start, and for those that are not aware, just check the at the institutefornaturalphilosophy.org our magazine Pharaohs, that it's free to watch and download. And if you want to contribute, just contact us, and that's it. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, of course, Ricardo. Thank you very much for coming on. And Heidi, what is going on, Heidi? Let everybody know what your deal is.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I'm Heidi Love of the Unfiltered Rise. I'm AKA the Mormon girl, usually, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And Ethan Indigo, last but not least, let everybody know
Peace
what your
on
deal is.
earth. It's an honor to be here with you guys. Excited to hear what Dr. Longo has to say. I'm a writer, philosopher, and just finished a little article on Occult Research Institute of our very own. So hope everyone checks it out on the Circumpunct. And yeah, great to be here, you guys.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ethan. And finally, to the guest, the special guest, the man of the hour, next hour and a half or how long it takes, we got Dr. Longo from Old World, Florida. Please, sir, I know most of the people that listen to me probably already know who you are, but if you could, just let everybody know what your deal is and where they can find all your amazing work.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, guys, for having me on. And I'm Dr. Longo. My name's Connor. You can call me Connor if you want, but I run the Old World Florida YouTube channel and Instagram, a Twitter too, and a Rumble. But we focus on the hidden history of Florida, esoteric history of Florida. You know, everything from the Garden of Eden in America to theories about Atlantis, evidence of Atlantis in Florida, ancient sites in Florida, you know, the indigenous history. It's all kind of really integral to America and being an American, believe it or not. So I think that's a lot of people's kind of interest in it outside of Florida, is you realize how like all roads almost lead to Florida in America, at least. And I'm also an astrologer, so I do kind of astrology and astrotheology here and there too. A little bit of holistic health here and there. That's kind of the doctor moniker, but yeah. Thanks for having me on.
No, of course. No, thank you very much. I think, like I had said to you in the beginning, I have heard you say it a few times on on shows. Maybe if you don't mind, maybe you could just give a little bit of a history about how like Florida even came to be, or the inception of it, because even that sounded very interesting to me.
Sure. There's theories about Florida going back 10,000 years, 100,000 years. There's some anomalous archaeological findings in Florida that kind of point back to a distant ancient past that we're not really being told about. But the best way to kind of open up this whole can of worms, the best gopher hole to dive down first would be America, as we know it, really had its genesis in Florida. A lot of people think of Washington, D.C. as like the heart or the birthplace of America. That's not the case at all. When people think of the American Revolution, they think of that as the birth of America a lot of times. No. The American Revolution was like America's puberty. We had our birth in Florida. People often forget Christopher Columbus was half as close to Florida. I think I'm saying that right. The distance he was to Florida. So when Christopher Columbus landed in the Bahamas, the distance he was to Florida from the distance he was to the mainland of South America was half. So he's twice as close as Florida as he was to South America. People think the whole story, the Bahamas is just a chain of islands off the coast of Florida. If it weren't for those pesky Bahamas, Columbus would have sailed right into Florida. Now, it took about 2 decades or so until they really set their sights on Florida. Columbus was 1492, 1493. Florida gets kind of charted. The first boots on the ground in Florida, European boots, would have been 1513, right? So that's the first recorded exploration of mainland America during the Age of Discovery. So yes, we have our theories about the Vikings and stuff, but as far as recorded history, meaning people got here and then they kept recording history all the way up until now, that all starts in Florida. Hence, we have St. Augustine, which is the oldest city in America, mainland America. It is nicknamed Ancient City. It's got a couple of other nicknames, but that's where it all kind of kicked off in Florida. To start off, it's one of the most esoteric, occult-coded cities in America, right? If you go there on a vacation, you'll have a field day of picking out, occult symbolism, strange architecture, anomalous architecture. They've got a site there that's, claims to be the Fountain of Youth. That brings us to a whole nother part of why were these Europeans coming here in the first place, right? They would have known really quick whether there was gold or not in Florida. There's not much gold, but they clung to Florida for the next 300 years. Why? What was it all about? Was it just trade routes? Was it just slavery? Well, there's something special about Florida that these superpowers have always been after, that the world religions have always been after, right? So it all kind of unfolds in Florida during the birthplace of America. And, some of the richest people in the world kind of pioneered the art of retiring to Florida. So just to drop some names, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, John D. Rockefeller, right? Henry Flagler. Not many people know Henry Flagler, but he was kind of behind the scenes. He was a co-founder of Standard Oil with John D. Rockefeller. So people say, oh, well, I don't care much about the Fountain of Youth. I don't care much about Atlantis and the Garden of Eden in Florida. Well, John D. Rockefeller and his buds, they certainly did. So for that reason, at least, I think people should be keen on understanding where all this kind of kicked off in Florida. A lot of the Civil War history, traces back to Florida, the esoteric origins of the Civil War, secret society behind the Civil War, how they kind of reformed, recentered in Florida after the Civil War. But you know, that's kind of the whole spiel. Is Florida was developed by Henry Flagler and his buddies. If it weren't for them, Florida would still be a place you had to take a boat to, you know? So that kind of brings us up to today, but we can dive off in any direction you want. I don't want to rant.
One question I just do want to ask, and we don't have to spend too much time on it, just maybe just in your opinion. Do you think that has anything to do with why Trump went to Florida? Because of the esoteric stuff?
Yeah, 100%. I know you guys are probably more welcoming to some of these topics than other shows, but I certainly believe that.
You go on. Go on if you want.
There's a thing called the Gulf Stream.
Yeah.
There's a thing called the Gulf Stream. So the question pretty much is, why did Trump choose where he is right now in Palm Beach, Florida, to be the headquarters, right? Not just his family headquarters. And just so you know, his primary residence now is in Palm Beach, Florida. During his first term, I think he was still technically a New Yorker. Now he's full-blown Floridian. And believe it or not, you know, there's a couple routes you could go with that topic. Mar-a-Lago itself has a history of being the home of presidents, or potential home of presidents. You know, during maybe even the 40s, but 50s and 60s, I believe it was repurposed as a winter White House. It was offered up by like a billionaire heiress to be a place of safe retreat for the president when he's down south. And so much so that, you know, I don't know the timeline too well on this, but by the 50s and 60s, they had installed nuclear warhead proof, and don't worry, you know, nukes are fake, maybe not. We can have that whole conversation too, but there is a bunker that we consider nuclear bomb proof. They claim there's one underneath Mar-a-Lago. Now, we know there's some type of safe room at Mar-a-Lago, but for sure there's a bunker on a place right, you know, he's on the water. On one side, there's the ocean. Behind him, there's the Intracoastal. On the Intracoastal, there's an island. And I think it's called Peanut Island, I believe. It's right over here, right by my hometown. He can take a boat from the back of his house to this island, and this is why that island was selected, and go be placed into a safe bomb bunker there. So that's been there for 60 years at least. You know, these military installations in Palm Beach, Florida. But as to why, and just so you know, JFK, if you're into the whole QAnon kind of legacy, JFK's family is really the family who chose Palm Beach as their place of retreat. And that's how the deal kind of ended up getting solidified, was the Kennedy family had been established in Palm Beach for a long time. So a lot of people think Trump is kind of following the footsteps of the Kennedys in a lot of ways, right, in certain ways. And part of that was moving to Palm Beach, Florida. So that's one part of it, that there's already this history of like secret bunkers and, you know, a hidden military infrastructure behind Palm Beach, Florida.
I had no idea.
The other side of it, more esoteric, or kind of zooming out and just looking at Earth and the properties of the land itself, there's a thing called the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is a warm water current that travels across the Atlantic Ocean. And this is kind of what brought the Europeans to America, or back to America, let's say, you know. I think people have always been crossing back and forth. So don't pin me down on any of these timelines. But as far as we, you know, record our history, the Europeans in the Age of Discovery, 1490s, 1500s, they kind of found out about the Gulf Stream again and started using it and keeping it secret. You know, it's almost like, you ever see like Nemo, when the turtles hop onto the ocean current and they surf it, you know, and it takes like no effort. That's what the Gulf Stream is. It's really like that. If your boat gets stuck in the Gulf Stream, you can have a bad day, you know. But the Bahamas is right here, where Columbus landed. Florida's right here, right? Florida. and the Gulf of Mexico is over here. I don't know if I'm flipped or not, but the Gulf Stream slithers, sneaks in between the Bahamas and Florida. And Bimini, so people know, a lot of people in esoteric circles know about Bimini and the prophecies surrounding the island of Bimini, the islands of Bimini, from people like Edgar Cayce. Bimini is the closest Bahama to Florida. So the Bahamas is a whole bunch of islands. Columbus landed in another one, Guanahani, they call it. But Florida is this big long peninsula. The Bahamas are just a little chain of islands. If you look at a map, the Gulf Stream sneaks right between those islands and Florida, and there's like a lot of kind of friction there. I don't know if it speeds up more there, but it gets pinched. It gets compressed. So out in the Atlantic, it's a little bit more of like a highway. But when it comes between Florida and the Bahamas, it gets really kind of compressed and focused in between. Now, would you be surprised if I told you that Palm Beach County is the part of Florida that pokes farthest out into the ocean and is rubbed up against most closely by the Gulf Stream? And just a little backstory on the Gulf Stream. Edgar Cayce, who's widely considered America's most substantiated, most validated, mystic, clairvoyant, whatever you want to call him, sleeping prophet. He prophesied, or he saw in the future, claimed that the central hall of records to Atlantis, he said there was 3. There's one in the Yucatan. There's one over towards Europe, closer, maybe I think he says the islands, not the Azores, but the other ones. Chip in if you guys know it. But
Madeira.
Which one?
Madeira. Portugal only has the Azores and the Madeira Islands, unless it's further south and then it's Cape Verde.
It's one of those. It's one of the islands over there. It's right up on the Atlantic coast of Europe. Cayce said there were these halls of records to Atlantis, and he said the central one, if not the capital city of what he considered Atlantis, because Atlantis spread out. You can interpret Atlantis to be a time period. You can interpret Atlantis to be a whole empire. But Edgar Cayce was talking about 3 specific sites. One of those was Bimini. Bimini is the closest island to Florida. That's not in the United States. It's in the Bahamas. You can get to Bimini from Florida in a canoe in 15 hours. 15 hours in a canoe. People do it all the time. They take paddle boards, like groups of like 50 people, they paddleboard across. You can do it in a wave runner. People do it all the time. It's that close to Florida. So it's, just so people can visualize, if you know where Florida is, if you know where the Bahamas are, the Gulf Stream sneaks right in there. So Edgar Cayce talked about Bimini. He also talked about the Gulf Stream, and he kind of emphasized the importance of the Gulf Stream. Almost everyone who's ever talked about Atlantis with real credibility has brought up the Gulf Stream in some way. So, another one of my favorite Atlantis myths comes from the Bok Saga, which is a whole nother take on the Atlantis myth. But that ties into Florida too, because what does the Bok Saga say kicked off their whole series of events and preserved Finland from total destruction? It was the Gulf Stream. They said a warm water current from the Gulf of Mexico saved Europe from the Ice Age. Everything else in Europe was sheared clean by glaciers. And, that has geological evidence to it. There's places with limestone that kept warm during the Ice Age and were spared from glacial, devastation because of warm water. That's that's all that kept those places intact. So most of America, you know, most of Canada, most of Northern Europe, you look at places like Estonia, you know, because it's very stony. Those are glacial deposited rocks. They're some of the biggest rocks on Earth, just flopped down like a pancake, sitting there with no apparent origin. Those are glacial deposits. I don't know what the exact word is, but the glaciers melt and drops the big rock down. But basically, it's like a wrecking crew wrecking most of Europe. And you
erratics. It's glacial erratics. Those big rocks that seem like they're out of nowhere.
Yeah, thank you.
And mapping those shows you the progression of all these different giant glacial movements all across Europe and North America. You've got glacial erratics all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Florida is one of the few places. It's not the only place. You know, if you see limestone in the Northern Hemisphere, that place was largely protected from the Ice Age. So limestone, like places like Malta, you see this like yellow limestone, right? There's probably a lot of sandstone and other stuff too there, but limestone, that means that place was largely preserved during the Ice Age. I wasn't there, but you know, this is like this is good evidence to kind of go off of. So Florida is one of the few places in the Northern Hemisphere that was untouched by the Ice Age. Okay. Almost everyone's in agreement that Florida has largely been how it looks today for like 10,000 years. It used to be twice as wide as it is, but other than that, it's been almost undisturbed for 10,000 years. And so the Gulf Stream is what determined whether or not a certain place was going to survive the Ice Age. Some good examples would be, everyone can go look this up. And again, this is just like Google information, whatever, but you know, take it for what it is. You know, all these geologists and climate experts will tell you, if the Gulf Stream diverted just a little bit, if it didn't keep its course that it keeps to this day, Iceland, the British Isles, and much of Northern Europe would still be in the Ice Age, still be blocks of ice, still be very, very, you know, hard to live in. It's the Gulf Stream that feeds this warm water to the south of the British Isles. You know that you can grow types of palm trees in the south of the British Isles. You can grow certain types of fruit and produce, ferns, succulents that you can't grow anywhere else in Europe unless the Gulf Stream is providing warm water there. And there's a couple places in the south of the British Isles where this is true, where this is, you know, extremely evident. And they have nicknames like, I always confuse it with the Wicker Man. They use that in the Wicker Man. They attribute it to like pagan deities, you know, blessing them with bizarre produce, but it's really just the Gulf Stream. You know, that's the secret behind the Wicker Man. And they nickname them the Summer Isles, or the Southern Isles are nicknamed the Summer Isles because they stay warm due to this Gulf Stream. So, and even Finland to this day, you know, the Bok saga kind of says, thank you, Gulf Stream, right? So to tie that all back to Trump, where I live right now is Lake Worth Beach. That's as close as you can get to Palm Beach Island, where Trump lives, without crossing the bridge. So this is like neighboring city to Palm Beach Island. People say Palm Beach, it's actually an island, the part that Trump lives on. And that is pretty much as close as you can get to the Gulf Stream, right here in Palm Beach County. My town right here, Lake Worth, is the most Finnish place in the Americas. The Finnish people moved here en masse 100 years ago, especially after World War II. A whole nother big wave came here. And to this day, many of the businesses, many of the people here, longtime residents, are Finnish. Very, you know, you can look at them and tell they're Finnish. So there's some spiritual connection. It's almost like salmon returning to their spawning point, right? We have sea turtles who do the same thing here too. it's almost like deep down back in their DNA, potentially their long lost Atlantean homeland. But maybe you can tie that to Trump, maybe not, but Trump is as close to the Gulf Stream as you can get, just to put it plainly. That's kind of why he is where he is.
Do you think that there's like weirdness with the Bermuda Triangle and stuff out there too? Because I mean, if it's the Garden of Eden and everybody is drawn, it's like you said, it's Atlantean-esque, and then you have all the weird Bermuda Triangle stuff. I always thought that Florida was interesting because of that, and then I found your channel, and then I started connecting all these little pieces, and it's got to be like pre-flood, maybe the Bahamas were somehow connected with Florida, and then, you know, it flooded and a lot of stuff was buried underwater. But I think it could be like one of the most ancient places on Earth.
Yes.
If I could jump in there, in the Fundamental Laws report of the 68th Convocation of the Rose Cross Order, this book that sort of got leaked from the Rosicrucians out of Pennsylvania, they claim in there that Atlantis was a land bridge going from the Baja Peninsula, but the other side of Mexico. What's that peninsula called? Right near Guatemala, all the way over to Africa, Yucatan Peninsula. And they say that there's a pyramid of fire somewhere around that region. And when that pyramid of fire is brought up, that's when Mexico and the United States will merge. This was back in 1916 when they wrote this. And they found in 2015, close to 100 years after this report, this giant pyramid off the shores of Cuba, 2,000 feet below the water. And so there's this strange connection in there with all of this Atlantean stuff being underwater at these places. And, you know, somehow they knew about this in 1916.
Oh, yeah.
My fascination is Casadega, because the spiritualism capital, like this whole vortex point, like this is kind of where I'm going to check out. Yeah. So that's, I mean, I don't know how you feel about all that, but.
Well, to your point, Julia, about the flood, pre-flood, the origin of the Gulf Stream, it's pretty evident. Florida is the highest concentration of freshwater springs in the world. So we think, 72 degrees, if you're swimming, you might think is cold, right? But in terms of like the world in general, 72-degree water is pretty warm, right? And warm, I believe fresh water will keep its warmth when you put it into salt water. Something about that. Maybe it has to be in a current, but there's something to that. And basically when all this fresh water oozes out of Florida, Florida really is like the rural member of America. Okay, oozing fertile waters into the Atlantic Ocean. Not to be, lewd or anything, but you can really put two and two together. It looks like that. It's constantly emptying millions and millions of gallons of fresh water into the Atlantic Ocean. A ton into the Gulf, but a ton into the Atlantic too. So just so you know, there's 1,000 notable freshwater springs in Florida. People think Florida is all about swamps and beaches and gators, and we also have the most crystal clear spring water in the world. The Florida Tourism Board just doesn't like to put it out there. Number one, because it's the fountain of youth and they don't want you drinking it because you'll live forever, or you'll live to 97 like John D. Rockefeller after you move to Florida. You'll live to 137 maybe, like some other guys that we can talk about. But they don't want you drinking pure Florida spring water. They all kept it for themselves. There used to be a black market for Florida spring water. Okay. Used to fetch as much as $1,000 for like a little vial, right? Like that big. That's why the Spanish held on to Florida for so long. But what is the Gulf Stream? And as far as a pre-flood timeline, Julia, if you've ever seen like a spring bubbling up out of the sand, it's almost like where the spring is coming up is kind of pushing sediment to the side. And Florida and the Gulf of Mexico largely has that property. You have the Mississippi River pushing all this stuff, flushing everything out into the Gulf. And then the spring water from Florida flushes all that out into the Atlantic. So no matter what type of flood, mud flood, sand, storm event, you name it, my gut feeling is that Florida is one of the most well-defended places against those type of cataclysms. I think that if there were a mud flood event over America, for example, I'm not a big mud flood guy, but I think Florida would be the first place to dig itself out of the mud with all that water just pouring out. It doesn't matter how much mud you stack on top of that. It's going to wash itself clean. That's largely why Florida is so flat too. It's almost like constantly eroding itself into like a perfect flat shape. Yeah.
Except for one place, which I was going to bring up, the Bok Tower. Bok Tower
Right.
is the only like mountain in Florida, and it's
Right.
built right up on top of that thing. What are your thoughts on the Bok Tower and that whole situation there?
Well, Heidi brought up Casadega, and Casadega actually wasn't too far from where John D. Rockefeller relocated. But to talk about Bok Tower, it's when they developed it, they thought it was the tallest point in peninsular Florida. So that's why they chose the location. And this actually all ties into the flood too. Bok Tower is one of the most magnificently landscaped, gardened, like floral arrangements, the decor, all this stuff, top notch. It's like a botanical gardens and a big fancy tower that looks like something out of Lord of the Rings. It was erected. And it was erected, it's not one of these Tartarian deals. I think the site just has its own special significance, that they took advantage of. I don't think it's an ancient building or anything, but there used to be a water tower on top of there in like the 19-teens. They got rid of that, and they constructed this tower out of pink granite, or pink marble, I forget, one of those that comes from Georgia, and a ton of Florida limestone too. And they brought all these materials in from really far away. Some of them were close, but a lot were really far away. Now, who owned this land? I talk a lot on my channel about a guy named E.E. Calloway, L.V. Edison Calloway. He's the guy who really popularized the idea of the Garden of Eden, biblical Garden of Eden, being in Florida. And hang on, people say Atlantis and Garden of Eden in the same place. Like, come on, you're getting greedy. You want everything to be in Florida. Well, there's something to this. And a lot of secret societies actually also believe this, and thus are headquartered in Florida. The Shriners.
I'm 100% convinced, by the way, just listening to your show. It's amazing. People have to go look at this Garden of Eden stuff. Mind blown. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, and people think the Garden of Eden and Atlantis are two separate things. So to claim both would be kind of greedy, right? Look at Florida. No, I actually see them as the same myth. Garden of Eden is the biblical account. Atlantis is simply the Greek account. Now, maybe they're telling different parts of this story, but there's a whole bunch of crossover, a whole lot. And also we have Atlanta, Georgia. Where does that come from? It doesn't get explained until you uncover the Garden of Eden in Florida theory, because Atlanta is only a significant point of interest, a point of industry and trade and culture coming together. The only reason it's on the map is because two of the rivers that are part of the four rivers which people think belong to the Garden of Eden in Florida. There's four rivers in Florida near this Georgia and Alabama state line. 4. It's perfect. It looks like your hand, right? Exactly like what you'd expect. The one in the Middle East, messy. They only have 2 rivers, right? And they say, oh yeah, one's in Africa, one's in India, and the other 2 are right here. Okay, right. Doesn't sound much like a garden either. What's a garden? The flattest, most well-watered piece of property you have. That sounds like Florida. But okay. Basically, 2 of these rivers, we can talk more about the rivers if you want. 2 of these rivers, if we fold the middle 2, right? And don't worry, okay, the Illuminati is not going to, zap anyone's brain or anything. These 2 rivers, they reconnect at what we call Atlanta. That's why Atlanta is on the map, because it used to be a kind of center of industry because of these 2 major rivers. So those 4 rivers in Florida are pretty significant. The state line between Georgia and Alabama is one of these rivers, is constituted by one of those rivers. So that's kind of forgot where I was going.
If I may ask.
Bok Tower.
Oh, sorry. Finish that.
I just want to say that the guy who came up with the Bok Tower, the guy who came up with the Garden of Eden Florida theory was the lawyer of the guy who owned Bok Tower, the land that it was built on. So let's say it one more time. The attorney / judge / Freemason / Shriner who believed that Florida was the Garden of Eden. He was also the attorney for the guy who'd end up selling the land of what would become Bok Tower. He owned all that land. So that's the link between Bok Tower and a whole bunch of these other theories on my channel. Bok Tower was selected and erected in the spot that it is. And then it was decorated with depictions of scenes from the Garden of Eden. So you have, it's just the Book of Genesis in general. Creation of the world, creation of the animals, creation of the heavens, creation of mankind, and then boom, a whole bunch of them are in the Garden of Eden, the serpent on the tree. And this is like engraved, embossed, I don't know what you call it, into a big giant like bronze door in the tower. And this tower, it's remarkable. If you get a good look at it down the canal, there's koi fish, there's all these tropical birds. And if you're into the whole bell theory, like bells being healing devices and the conspiracy to get rid of the bells, well, this place doesn't just have one bell. This tower, big tower, like I said, it looks like something out of Lord of the Rings. It has, it's called a carillon. And that's basically like an organ made out of big giant bells. So instead of pipes making the noise, it's bells making the noise. So a guy, you have to be trained how to play this instrument. Only like 100 people in the world know how to play it.
It's a typical instrument in Portugal. It's called a carillon.
Thank you. Yeah, in America, most people don't know this. I wouldn't know anything about it if it weren't for Bok Tower. It's like an organ you can sit down and play, and I think there's pedals too. You play it, and it dings the bells. So each note you play dings a bell. So imagine an instrument of that scale. And they say the largest bell in there was bigger than an SUV. Right? One bell. And then the smallest one was, I imagine, like, the size of your head. And you could play all these notes.
That's because they need to create several different frequencies to create the purpose of the building itself, to produce its functionality. So the only instruments that we know on our age that can produce that are the pipe organs in the churches. That's why they are in the churches or the chapels. It's where they can activate something. And it seems that they are on that tower too, but by the ancient use of bells. And I'm sure that those bells are either they exist still, I don't know, but as you know, all the bells were changed by the time of the Second World War because they needed to focus people on war and not on healing. So that's why they changed all the bells and said it was the effort for the war.
Right. Yeah, good point, Ricardo. Yeah, the carillon I'd imagine is on par with the organ for healing. You know, it's big, and when you're in front of one, it's loud, right? Like a real organ, it's real loud, and you can feel the air pressure changing. It's very, very soothing. We did one of my full moon meetups there. We had a whole bunch of people there. People loved it. Very calming. You can go there too. It's like a common tourist place. It's very on the map. It's very well known for people outside of America. It's like one of their destinations. So you'll see a lot of Asian tourists there and stuff like that. But when you live in America, when you live in Florida, people don't really care about it. And like I said, it has scenes from the Garden of Eden. And then I believe, I don't know where it ends. I think it ends with them getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden. But, you know, in sequence, you'd then have the flood, right? A couple chapters later or so. And it just so happens that where Bok Tower is preserved, it's like Florida's Georgia Guidestones. I should have started off with that. Bok Tower, which is in the dead center middle of Florida, is like Florida's Georgia Guidestones. It has a story written on it that's like universal. The Garden of Eden. There's no words. Anybody of any language can come up and see this. I think that's part of the appeal. And also, it's built like a brick shithouse. It's built as if if any building could withstand a flood, if any tower could withstand a flood, it would probably be this one. It's well built, just from looking at it.
Have you tried to measure the frequency there?
No, that's not it's not something I'm really good at or know how to do.
I ask because of this.
Yeah.
You said that there are innumerous underwater ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you say that you go there and you feel good.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what is expected, because if you have underwater ways and probably fault lines, I'm sure there'll be fault lines in there, because that's the reef that separates Florida from the United States. It's a fault line. So you have all the ingredients. You have the fault line, you have the underwater ways, and you have a tower. What a coincidence. So when the tower has a system to work out sounds to produce specific effects. So I'm sure there's more to the tale than that. But if I may, I have two little questions for you. One of them is, for instance, the Moors until the 11th century spoke about 6 species of paradise from the first world. So when the world was dismantled, the paradise was broken into 6 species, and those 6 species were spread through the earth. One of those species is the mountain called Sintra. That is the only place during the Crusades that they decided not to fight the knights, and they just granted the site to them because they wouldn't dare spread a drop of blood in sacred ground. This is completely unheard of in the brutal Crusades, because they considered the mountain of Sintra as one of those, the only of the 6 species that they have found, the only one. That doesn't mean that they don't exist in other ones. And now you're talking to me about Florida as being one place considered the paradise. And my question is, could it be one of those 6 species of the paradise instead of the paradise itself? And my second question is, are you aware of the movie from the director Darren Aronofsky called The Fountain, which is protagonized by Hugh Jackman?
Yo, I was just watching that a few days ago.
So to your first question, could Florida be one of multiple paradises? 100%. That's kind of my always like the end of my spiel. I'll say, once I lay out all the evidence for the Garden of Eden in Florida, I'll usually say something along the lines of, I think the Garden of Eden was in Florida if there was only one. And I do think that there's evidence of some type of franchising of the Garden of Eden. And that's kind of why I like the Bok saga, because it ties everything together. The Bok saga is kind of like the bullseye in the whole equation. They say hell is at the center of the world, not the hell in the middle of not the hot, fiery core of the earth, but folded out. Look at, kind of the flat earth map, kind of the UN map. If you're looking at the North Pole, that's hell at the middle of the world. That's hell at the center of the world. Hell is freezing cold. You speak Portuguese, right, Ricardo? Hell and winter are pretty much the same word in most of the Romance languages. Invierno and Infierno. I think Mossad took out Ricardo here. We're gonna power
I
through
was
that.
gonna say
yeah.
something like that too.
Yeah, well-
As soon as he started talking, he got cut
Oh
off.
boy.
Yeah, there is actually problems going on in Spain right now where they're actually losing power, and
Oh.
yeah, it's actually this. I don't know. Sounds like
True.
an issue.
Well,
Dr. Longo, have you heard of the Mormon stuff there that they think that Lehi originally landed there in Florida and that
Yeah.
they are the largest landowners of Florida as well, the LDS Church to this day?
yes. Yeah.
What do you think about that?
You said you were Mormon at the beginning, or
My whole life. Yeah, my whole life. I'm here in Utah. I'm not Mormon anymore, but I was Mormon for most of my life.
nice.
They've
But-
noted a lot of the things that I know from your channel, like special bees and special honey and special,
Yes.
they kind of lend some credence. Now, I mean, I speak out. Mainly my issue with Mormons nowadays is just that they aren't honest and they're a magical practicing order. And if they would just be honest, I think it'd be totally awesome. You know what I mean? But their history is there nonetheless. And we can't just chuck out everything. I mean, that's just silliness. Like I agree with you. And I know they mention a lot of this, like the climate and the native people and these special bees that make this Tupelo honey that's only special to this area. It kind of lends some credence there.
Yeah. That Tupelo honey actually ties into the whole Civil War secret society and the taking back of Mexico that he mentioned up here. Can you put the comment away so I can see his title again?
Yeah,
Sorry.
sorry.
Headless giant. That headless giant brought up. He said, the secret plan to bring America and Mexico together actually ties right into that Tupelo honey conspiracy. Some people call it liquid gold. There was a movie called Yuli's Gold. And who was the first Jewish senator in America, who was also Florida's first state senator? David Levy Yulee. So the Yulee family was this family who came to America. They were Sephardic, Jews who were in kind of the piracy, a little bit of piracy. People don't like to admit that, but a little bit of piracy, a little bit of human trafficking and slave trade, lumber trade, sugar. He had his hands in everything. His family, the patriarch, Moses Levi Yulee, or Moses Eli Yulee, threw it all away and said, I'm going to open a utopia in Florida. And he was very much on this Mormon wavelength. It's written in newspapers that he was interested in interphasing his radical new sect of Judaism that he started in Florida, which they believed, like messianic prophecy, that all the Jews who were being persecuted in Eurasia were going to move to Florida and start a new Jerusalem. And Jerusalem and Florida are actually on the same latitude. Precisely. That's the northern state line of Florida is the 31st latitude. So it's paralleling Jerusalem quite literally. And who came up with that? The same guys who designed Washington, D.C. selected the state lines for the Southeast United States. This is
I
called
was hoping you would bring that up. I love it when you talk about that.
it's called the Ellicott line. There's a couple Ellicott lines because that's the main guy who was doing it. He wasn't a Mason, but he was partners with the Masons who designed DC. I'm blanking on their names. they selected the state lines for Florida and, made them official. So that's where we get that panhandle of Florida. That's the flat line in Florida. It's also the flat line between Louisiana and Mississippi. And the panhandle of Florida used to go all the way up to the Mississippi River. That was the cutoff of West Florida. And that panhandle was the 31st, right? So that parallel line, flat line, goes all the way to Jerusalem. Blah, blah, blah. But, Ricardo, to your point about multiple Gardens of Eden, that 31st latitude is to me the whole gravy, kind of the gravy train that connects Florida to those other Gardens of Eden. Because where do we get the basis that Florida was the biblical Garden of Eden? Well, guess what, guys? The biblical Garden of Eden, the only, explicit landmarks we get are the 4 rivers: Tigris, Euphrates, Gihon, and Pison. In the Middle East, they call it the Euphrates instead of the Hiddekel. Or sorry, the Tigris. They say Tigris, but Tigris isn't in the Bible. That's the only thing that's different. But they have 4 rivers in the Bible. Only 2 of those are in the Middle East. But doesn't matter. One of them's the Euphrates, one of them's the Tigris. Now, the exact spot where the Tigris and the Euphrates split, the exact spot. Everyone can go do this on Google Maps. Go find where the Tigris and the Euphrates split and drop a pin precisely where the Tigris and Euphrates fork. Actually, they're what's the word? That's where they confluence. Thank you. That's the confluence of those 2 rivers. So you can call it a fork, but they're really coming together. But on the map, it'll look like they're forking, right? Drop it right where the 2 rivers fork, 31.00. There's not many landmarks in the world that are so perfectly, attached, kind of marked by a line of latitude that precisely.
May I ask, when they were designing the state line on the 31st longitude, did they purposefully announce that it was because its connection to the Holy Land? No,
that was an unspoken thing. It goes in with the whole New Jerusalem. Yes, we can tie it all together. Actually, it's just there's not like explicit evidence. No one said, "Hey guys, this is where the Garden of Eden is, so we're going to choose this number." They didn't say that outright, but it all goes back to the Yulee family. Moses, Eli, Levi. He ditched his name of Yulee. His son, David Levi Yulee, revived the family name. And he's Florida's first senator. He's America's first Jewish senator. Why was a Jewish family in the Confederate South? He was also a Confederate senator. Two of the biggest financiers of the Confederacy were David Levi Yulee and his cousin, Judah P. Benjamin. They were also behind some of the big secret societies in the South. Florida was the center of Freemasonry in the South, the unspoken headquarters of Freemasonry in the South during the Civil War.
Any presence of Templars connected to Florida?
Yes. I'll try and tie that in here, but you're going to like this point about the 31st parallel. It was David Levi Yulee who gave Florida its statehood. So he's like the George Washington of Florida. He was a Confederate senator, but before the Civil War, he fought to make Florida a state. It was just a territory. So in 1820, Florida was kind of acquired by the United States, 1821. But it wasn't until 1845 that we officially became a United State. David Levy is the guy who got to select when, and we know he selected when. So to your point, Ethan, about, them coming clean about why they chose that place, you kind of have to piece it together yourself, but we can see that he selected the day, March 3rd, to make Florida a state. March 3rd is Florida's birthday. 33. David Levy Yulee. His name was spelled Y-U-L-I. Why did he bring back his ancient family, Jewish Sephardic family name out of nowhere in the Confederate South, where you'd think they'd want to be hiding that stuff? Why do you, on the same year that he became Florida's first Jewish senator, he revived his family's dead name. But he didn't spell it the same way they spelt it when they got rid of that name, Y-U-L-I, or simply U-L-I. They started spelling it Y-U-L-E-E. E-E. You know how many significant double E names you see in Florida history and all across? Go guys, go ape on the 33 EE names. People think of CC like Coral Castle. That's in Florida too. The Coral Castle zip code is 33033. You can't make that up. Florida's birthday is 3-3. Juan Ponce de Leon set out for Florida 500 years ago, also on 3-3, March 3rd.
Something I just want to add real quick. I just happened to look at it real fast. The Yulee with the Y-U-L-E-E in English gematria, it does match Mar-a-Lago.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, Ed Leeds-Skounen did the exact same thing. That's why I bring up the Coral Castle. It's not ridiculous to call these guys out on renaming themselves to have a consecutive EE in their name.
No, there's a reason for that. Yeah, there's definitely.
Ed Leeds-Skounen did the same thing.
I usually say coincidence takes planning.
Yep, exactly.
That type of.
Ed Leeds-Skounen also had an I in his name. Edmund Edward, I forget his name. I think it was Edvard Leeds-Skounen, the guy who built the Coral Castle in South Florida, on the zip code, the zip code 33033. And Freemasons, if you can't afford a trip to Egypt to see the pyramids, like Colonel Sanders did, took a trip to Egypt with his fez hat and everything, you just go to Coral Castle. That's the next best. That's the next best thing. So Freemasons are actually encouraged to take at least one pilgrimage to the Coral Castle.
Oh.
Do you think that it's true what he said, that he levitated those stones into place with nothing but like two forks or whatever he said?
Yeah, he had some kind of primitive implements, nothing you'd see on a construction crew today. And people say, "Oh, he had a tripod with a wench or whatever you call it."
They say that he didn't have anything.
Well, he had a tripod, and there's some pictures of him holding big rocks up on this big tripod. But that tripod, people say, was only rated to like half the weight of the largest stone that's in the park. So yes, he had something to help him, but it couldn't have helped him much with the biggest blocks that he was working with.
The tripod wouldn't be able to place the stones in place. It could only lift the stones, could not take them and place them. And that placement is the most difficult part of any stone transportation. Transport is relatively easy depending on the size and weights, but the placement is what takes a lot of time. Even today, if you go place a big stone, it could take 2 days. And if there is a little bit of wind, they won't make it, for instance. So it's the placement that is hard to do.
Good point. And the craziest part about the Coral Castle is he built most of it in one place in Florida, in one city. And then a decade or 10 or 20 years in or so, he changes his mind and says, "Nah, I want to move the whole thing to another city in Florida." And he moves the whole thing to another part of Florida, adds a little bit more to it, and kind of, I think he was working. I don't know if he was working up until his death, but I think he just kept adding to it. But he moved the whole thing. There's a big kind of conspiracy about how he moved it. He hired a truck driver, and I think the truck driver's on record as saying he saw some suspicious stuff. There was some kids who snuck in and claimed to have seen some suspicious stuff, like him holding. They claimed that he was holding like ice cream cones, almost like those old Anunnaki pine cone type things, something like that. What's that one guy's name? The South African guy. Michael Tellinger talks about the pine cone stones, cone shaped stones being like the most potent, for this type of stuff. There's theories about how he did it, but what jumps out to me is where he did it. He put it one place, then he's like, it's not the right place. And I see some of the commenters here are correct in saying he chose his locations with dowsing rods. That's a fact.
Yeah,
the locals know for a fact. They recorded it. This strange man from Eastern Europe, Baltic country, he was from Latvia. Ed Leedskounen, back to his name, spelled with an I. Leedskounen. He moves to America. What does he do? EE. Ed Leedskounen. So
have you made any hypothesis as to what is up with the EE?
Yeah, it's, reversed backwards, it's 33. So numerologically, it's not 33, but kind of visually mirrored, it is 33. Another person who's done that would be E.E. Calloway, who went as E.E. his entire professional life, even though he had a perfectly great name. He could have chose any of his names. Elvie Edison Calloway.
Henry? Is it the cross?
Elvie, like Elvin. Like elf, like almost like Elvis.
Yeah, but the two E's. Henry on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
It's also two E's.
And there's some significant Henrys.
Jesus Nazarenos Rex Judeum, because it's an I.
Right. But we've got a whole bunch of powerful, important, consecutive double E's in people's names in Florida. And the E.E. Calloway guy, he's the Garden of Eden in Florida guy. He was a Freemason, so we know David Leviuli was a Freemason. E.E. Calloway was a Freemason. Ed Leedskounen, we don't know. All evidence points to yes, but
during his life, he did have several conflicts with local Freemasons, and after he died, they built a Freemasonic temple out in front of the Coral Castle, almost like we did this. So there was a conflict between him and the Masons. I think they were trying to sort of take ownership of what he was doing there.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. I can believe it. But Ricardo, I want to hit this point home about your great question about multiple paradises. What ties all this together is the Yulee family selecting these dates and kind of probably agreeing with the state lines, where they were selected and stuff. A whole nother part of that is, like I was saying about the two rivers in Iraq, right? The two rivers in Iraq, if we drop a pin right there where the Tigris and Euphrates split, it's perfectly 31.00. Now, if we take that and go west to America from the spot where the Tigris and Euphrates split, the first point of interest you reach on that parallel is the holy city of Jerusalem. So, Jerusalem, it's believed that Jerusalem's location was selected because of a special spiritual quality. I forget which prophet selected the location, but the location for Jerusalem was inspired by, it was finalized because it's the same exact spot that the two rivers of Eden fork. So Jerusalem is just taking that same parallel and bringing it out to the coast, right? To pretty much where it just about reaches water again. So now we're in water. If we take that 31st parallel even farther west, we're going to see a whole bunch of significant cities. And actually, I believe the mouth of the river Nile, I think, is 31 by 31. If it's not 31 by 31, it's 30 by 31 or 31 by 30. But I'm pretty sure it's 31 by 31, where the Nile River meets the ocean, the mouth of the Nile River. So we're going to keep going, and there's a whole bunch of other, special places that are on that latitude. Talk about ley lines. This is like the mother of all ley lines. Crossing it over to Florida, to America, what's the first piece of land that the 31st 0.00 latitude strikes? Jekyll Island, Georgia. Right over the state line. State line, again, is the 31st latitude. Right over the state line from Florida. Jekyll Island used to be part of Florida when it was known as La Florida 500 years ago. Now it's technically in Georgia. Georgia didn't acquire it until 1947. 46, 47, same time that Jerusalem was getting gifted to a group of people. Okay, Israel as a whole. Jekyll Island.
For those that don't know, can you break down what Jekyll Island is known for? Sorry to interrupt your flow.
No, for sure. Jekyll Island is the place where the Federal Reserve System, the act and the system, was conceived. So, 100 years ago, who were the richest men in the world? 115 years ago. John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Henry Flagler, right? The co-founders of Standard Oil, plus J.P. Morgan, plus representatives of the Vanderbilts, representatives of the Rothschilds. 10 of the wealthiest, families and institutions in the world sent representatives to Jekyll Island, Georgia in 1910. Up until now, this was a billionaire's retreat. It was, Florida wasn't very well developed yet. So Miami, Bahamas, these were like pirate hideouts. You couldn't really vacation there, especially if you were the world's richest man. So the world's richest people, if they wanted that warm southern weather, they used to go to Jekyll Island. And it's an island, and there wasn't even a bridge there until 40s or 50s. You had to take a boat there. So if you want privacy, that's the place to go. And it was cleaned out of pirates, well cleaned out of pirates and Indians by then. So that was the place to be 100 years ago in America. The Rockefellers built a cottage there on top of an Indian mound. And there's Indian mounds all over the island. And every structure on the island there today is built in the footprint of an ancient site, a building that the ancient people used to live in, whatever. Now, all these places around Jekyll Island, there's kind of a clubhouse. There's the clubhouse, and then there's the Jekyll Island Rockefeller Cottage, nicknamed Indian Mound Cottage. There's a whole bunch of other places, but those are the 2 points of interest in the Federal Reserve story. It's believed that the representatives of the richest families in the world, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Vanderbilts, the Morgans, all came, and this sounds like a made-up board game, right? This sounds like, a game you'd play at a party or something. No, this is real. All the richest men in the world, or their representatives, in the same room, coming up with the idea, how are we going to screw over America next? Pretty much, right? I don't know if there's ever been more of a clear-cut screw over in American history.
And the people that they did that to was the Timucuans, right? Wasn't this the Timucuan Indians?
Yeah. The Indians that used to live there in ancient times were the Timucua. And the Timucua were a really anomalous group of Native Americans. And this kind of brings up the question, why would they choose Jekyll Island? Yes, it's warm. Yes, the reasons I listed before. Why did these rich people need to go to Jekyll Island? Couldn't they just choose somewhere really secluded in like New York? So couldn't they choose somewhere to do this meeting somewhere more convenient? Nope, they had to do it in Jekyll Island. And I'm going to make the argument here, and some other people who've, came before me and dealt with this topic really originated this idea that they chose Jekyll Island because of the black magic that they wanted to do there would have been supported and bolstered and intensified by the ancient dark magic that used to be practiced on the island by the Timucua Indians. Part of the Timucua Indian lifestyle was sacrifice of the firstborn child, straight out of the Bible. And, there's great books on the whole financial side of Jekyll Island, like The Creature from Jekyll Island, G. Edward Griffith, I forget his name. And they, that goes all into the finances and the secrecy that they undertook to kind of make this meeting happen. But it doesn't go into the esoteric or spiritual reasons of why they chose. It wasn't until a guy by the name of Timothy Bence, an American preacher, mystic, Christian mystic, right? This guy's a light worker if there's ever been one, okay? He's like Obi-Wan Kenobi in my eyes. This guy's like, he's a legend in the conspiracy theory community. He went in there, and he's the first guy to uncover the ancient connections of, why they do it there. What's with the indigenous history that they had to conceive the Jekyll Island there. And they signed an agreement there, but it wouldn't be till 3 years later that they put it into action, passed the Federal Reserve Act. Well, they chose that spot in Jekyll Island because the Rockefeller Cottage, like I said, was built on an Indian mound. The particular Indian mound that Rockefeller Cottage was built on was the site of an ancient sacrificial altar where they would do things like child sacrifice. It's one of the first things that the Europeans recorded visually and, made a note of it, that they drew a picture of it and recorded that the Timucua Indians there in northeast Florida and Jekyll Island's the farthest north extent of their range. So this is really like a Florida Indian group. Jekyll Island's like their northernmost settlement.
Right, and there's an element too of spirituality and golf that sort of go hand in hand at this location and lots of other different golf courses around the country. So they make these golf courses around these mound sites, and then people don't even know what they're looking at. They just think they're playing golf, but really they have mound sites there and they're well maintained, and they don't have to reveal any kind of their secret spirituality as they go out to these golf sites, which brings back to mind this whole Trump connection. They're always at the golf courses.
Yeah.
Are you being for real?
Yeah.
That's what the golf course. Fuck you, headless, coming out of nowhere with some mad shit.
You know what's really weird is I did say I do question if that golf course was somewhat used in a way with all the Lady Bird lake drownings. With the smiley face killer type stuff in Austin, Texas, because they're showing up in an area where there's a golf course and then I think a park or something. You kind of, I don't know. I just thought maybe something's going on there.
For those out there who've never kind of dived into golf, and why do the richest people in the world play golf all day? Why is it like the ultimate flex of like being a man over the age of 35? It's like everyone wants to play golf, Everyone wants to be seen on the golf course, or the establishment at least, right? Well, golf is the only sport that partakes of the subterranean world. It's the only sport, conventional ball game, competitive sport, let's say. You know, there's swimming, there's cave diving, competitive sports. It's the only sport where you got a hole in the ground. You know, the bunkers, hole in the ground, and then that's just the overt playing of the game. As Headless Giant pointed out, golf courses didn't start out because they were, you know, a nice place to kind of hit the ball around. It's because there was Indian mounds. And the Indian mounds in a place like Florida, why do we have golf courses? It's like the golf capital of the world now. Golf came out of Scotland, just like Freemasonry largely did, around the same time. Huge link between golf and Freemasons. You had to be a Freemason to play in some of the earliest golf clubs in Scotland. And a lot of those societies would end up branching off into Florida. So the Florida Gulf, I just messed up right there. Gulf and golf, look at that too. The Gulf Stream is the Gulf Stream. That's what links Britain to Florida too. But golf, the sport, you're going into the underworld a little bit. Also, the way you play it, a lot of times you have cleats, and not always, but a lot of times they're metal cleats. You're quite literally grounding, like stabbing into the graves of the ancient people who lived there. The Indian mounds in Florida, there's a plaque over here in Palm Beach that explains the golf courses and parks were selected in the places they are today because there were Indian mounds there that like encouraged people to, you know, play on. You know, if Florida's totally flat for the most part, and then there's this ancient Indian settlement that's today is just mounds, big rolling, nice mounds, you know, cover in grass and call it a golf course. That's what most of the golf courses in Florida are. Most of the golf courses in Florida are built on top of ancient sites. They'll admit that to you in places like Palm Beach Island and in public parks. There's plaques explaining the process of how people moved in, and the richest people in the city wanted to live on the highest land. What's the highest part of land in a place like Palm Beach Island? Indian mounds. So you had the richest people fighting to live on top of them. And then you had the richest people in the world in their spare time playing games on top of them. I don't know if it's a desecration thing. I don't know if it's a absorbing, kind of like soaking in all that old graveyard energy. You know, people like to do things in graveyards, maybe conducting business over the graves of ancient races does imbue your dealings and business workings with this kind of extra occult force, you know, this occult.
Especially like
whatever.
They were into hoodoo too. They were into some really dark, I mean, what I read about it anyway, they were into hoodoo, these native people. So I'm with you, like they're probably tapping. That's my guess.
Right. Well, this goes into a little bit of what I found about the top hat. So anytime you see, you know, that style of the top hat, that actually goes back to the ancient depictions of Hades wearing a flower pot on his head. And what you see in all of these hoodoo and voodoo rituals is that the Papa Legba, the main guy in charge, is wearing the top hat because it sort of harkens back to this god of the underworld.
Oh, 100%. Also, there's some other, you know, most of the Egyptian gods have something akin to a golf club in their hands. I mean, what the hell is that? They literally look like golf clubs. Most of those like scepters that the Egyptian gods are posing with. And then you see also the two-ball cane logo. You know, two-ball cane is kind of this Masonic and Masonic adjacent saying, expression, story, but a symbol also. So it's symbolized in a hockey stick with a ball on either side. Pretty phallic. There's a whole bunch to the whole two-ball cane thing. But two-ball cane, I believe it's a name out of the Bible too. that they do a play on words with. So two-ball cane, they take his name and make it two ball and a cane, hitting the ball with the cane. So you have the gods of the underworld with canes, you know, the bident would be another example. Like the pitchfork is, Neptune has the trident. The god of the underworld has the bident. Joe Biden, anybody? Scorpio? Scorpio.
Oh, boy.
Ruled by Pluto, the god of the underworld, you know?
And they lived a long time, right? These people like knew some secrets because they were bigger. Their bone density, like I actually looked it up, and archaeology wise, like they're built completely different from what I saw anyway.
The Tubal Cain line goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden as well, so that makes sense. But something I kind of wanted you to talk about a little bit, because I find it very interesting, is that in the Garden of Eden they talk about the golden apple and how that's probably a reference to something else that grows in Florida, not necessarily an actual golden apple.
Right. Yeah, good point. In many world mythologies, but especially some of the Greek stories, we have mentions of a golden apple. Now, in the Bible, the word apple isn't explicitly used in the Garden of Eden. Forbidden isn't used either. You know, a lot of people think this, and but saying the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, what was that? Well, we can take it two directions. You can interpret it as the same thing as the golden apples in other parts of, other parts of the world. They talk about the same type of thing. For example, the Garden of Hesperides. Garden of Hesperides is the phonetic origin of the word paradise. So anytime we use the word paradise, that word comes from Hesperides, right? There is Hesperus, Hespera, and a couple members of what were called the Daughters of the Dawn or the Daughters of the Evening. They were also known as the Atlantites. So that's another big link between the Garden of Eden, Paradise, and Atlantis, is the Greek version of the Garden of Eden, usually called the Garden of Hesperides, but the alternate name is the Garden of Atlantites. So in the Greek myth, Garden of Eden and Atlantis really go hand in hand. But Hesperides is where we get the word paradise. So in the Garden of Hesperides, there were citrus trees. Some people say pomegranate, but usually it's citrus. In fact, in a couple countries around the world, one of them being Finland, they call orange and citrus applecini. Applecini. Apple sin. Cine, the orange. Now they say that means China, like Sino, Sini, China. But I don't think so. I think it's like a syncretized word where sin, the apple of sin. So if you're looking for a golden apple, Florida's got oranges, plenty of them. They're not native to Florida, but they were some of the first fruits brought over by the Europeans. And the Native Americans planted them. When they repelled the Europeans, kick them out, fight them off, they'd keep the citrus and plant it for themselves. So they were some of the first, citrus aficionados in America, were the Native Americans. But, I've theorized about citrus being in Florida for longer than they tell us, because there's other plants like that. For example, the pineapple, which is an American fruit, shows up in certain Roman and Greek art. Other things that are, native or endemic to America, like corn, shows up on Rosslyn Chapel. Ricardo, you mentioned the Templars. The Templar link between Florida, Rosslyn Chapel is one of them, because some people say that corn is in Rosslyn Chapel. Some people say that tobacco and not aloe, but something like aloe that grows in the South United States. People believe that Templars, Freemasons, their ancestors traveled to the Southeast United States a long time ago. You know, look at the whole Oak Island thing that's kind of developing today. That kind of ties that all in together too.
Yeah, there's several evidences of their presence way before the Columbus. Yes.
But Julia, we can also say, you know, the forbidden fruit, golden apple. I do a lot of videos about citrus and the healing qualities of citrus. I'll be the first to tell you, citrus is the most healing food in the world. Doesn't matter if you're a vegan, a carnivore, whatever. Everyone can agree that there's no food is more finely tuned to the human body and the needs of a human than citrus. I mean, by God, it's already sliced. It's prepackaged. It's pesticide proof. Okay? Citrus is largely pesticide proof. Spray it all you want. When you peel it open, it's going to be pretty much clean. Okay? I'm still all for organic.
I apologize for my ignorance, but it's a language barrier. So citrus is orange or citrus is apples?
It's the orange family. So
okay,
orange.
So we have a problem there.
Yeah.
Because the problem with citrus is they will absorb up to 70% of what is given to the earth. So
right.
So if if what is given to the earth to feed the citrus trees, and I know because I have them, a lot of them here in my land, whatever you feed them is whatever you're going to eat. So if they are raised in a place where the water is holy by the natural frequency, like Florida, as I'm starting to understand, those fruits will be highly healing because they'll have what the ancients called like the living water in them, because the water will be purified, will be structured water by the frequency. Yeah. But if it is raised in a land that receives pesticides or whatever it's put on the land to fertilize the trees, you will going to get it in the juice of that fruit. So it has those two sides. So it can be both very healing, but it will absorb everything that will be given to the tree.
Right. Well, you know, I've heard otherwise a little bit. I've heard that citrus is one of, I don't know if it's in the clean 15, but I've always heard it in with the safer side. I've always heard that tropical fruit and things with a thick rind, they're going to defend themselves as much as they can. Those fruits like that, they have their own immune system. You know, you nick it and it'll scab itself. Mangoes, citrus, apples, not so much. If you take an apple and you nick it, it's kind of it's kind of compromised. Not always, but maybe, you know, what you're saying is right, that it, because it's such a living fruit, it pulls things into itself. My experience tends to be that they spray a lot of the oranges here to shit, but the orange works in its own favor so much. You know, and I'm not coming up with this. We have a doctor here who says his name's Dr. Morse. He's one of the greatest raw fruit healing, like food gurus in the world. We sell his book here too, Detox Miracle Handbook. He says he'll take the worst orange over the most organic, like other citrus, you know, non-citrus. So, you know, I'm not entirely disagreeing with you. I'm not an expert, but I've always heard that it's usually on the cleaner side. If you've got an apple that's been sprayed, if you've got an orange that's been sprayed, I'm going to go with the orange. So in terms of, I'm sure everything can get tainted, you know, but I've always believed that citrus really cleans itself out, keeps itself clean. And to your point about what, you know, soaking up the minerals, that's definitely true. I believe Florida citrus is some of the best in the world because of how swampy and sulfury the water is here. And the orange definitely does absorb many of those nutrients that you wouldn't find in the groundwater elsewhere. California citrus in my humble opinion, doesn't come anywhere close to Florida citrus. That's just my opinion. But
and I have to say also to your point, because I think this is why it's also cool, is there's something different about Florida's oranges. And we could tie it all into like the frequencies and it being kind of like a energetically charged place. But I noticed after I listened to your episode, because there was a guy who said he lived for, I don't know, a couple of years just drinking orange juice and like it had everything he needed in it. And he literally just survived on orange juice. So I was like, ooh, yeah, I'm going to start drinking more OJ, you know, get a little spiritualism in my diet. The freaking Florida's own, or whatever the brand is, Florida's natural orange juice. If you look at the box, they don't even use Florida oranges. They get all their oranges from Mexico. So it's like you're not even getting the healing, beautiful properties of the Florida oranges because they don't even use them. They use oranges from freaking Mexico. I felt so stabbed in the back by Florida's natural. They should just call it Mexico's natural if that's what they're going to do.
Right. Yeah. You know, there's part of it is, yes, the big brands have always been kind of deceiving people, right? Oh, our company's in Florida, but the oranges aren't. There are some good Florida orange juices, you know, the local, the better, of course. I'm always going to go with non-sprayed over sprayed, of course, too. But there's an issue. There's a conspiracy. Some people say that it was China's fault. Some people say it's, you know, created in a lab. But there's two issues, two kind of diseases that are decimating Florida's citrus. And it's called the canker, citrus canker. And then there's, I don't know if it's the same thing or related, but greening. They call it greening or something like that. But there's two things that are really afflicting Florida citrus right now. And the big brands were the ones who were kind of calling the shots during a lot of this scare about the diseases. 30 years ago or so, you know, around when I was born or a little longer, my dad, all the people who lived in Florida back then would tell you they used to go around with helicopters, teams with assault rifles. If they knew you owned a gun and you had citrus trees, they'd send armed officers in case you wouldn't let them cut down your citrus trees. The government put out an order. All the private citrus that has been detected, you know, they detect this like plague in, I don't know if it's a virus or disease or whatever. I'm not a botanist or anything like that, but these diseases that a lot of people think came from China. Citrus comes from China. We'll be fair here. Citrus comes from China, so the diseases that go along with it also come from China. But because of this whole thing, because the government was going to protect the big name industries, they got together and said, well, we can try and manage the spread in private owners, but we're going to let you guys keep, you know, if we get rid of as much private citrus, that's going to keep the orange industry alive. So they went around backyard to backyard. And if you were within a certain like diameter from an infected plant, they came in and they took your orange trees. Now, orange, sweet orange, the one that people want to eat the most and the one that contributes most to like your daily nutrition, right? An orange can be a meal, right? Lemons are good too, but orange and grapefruit, you know, you can fill your stomach up with that. It's a complete food. Okay. They got rid of all the sweet orange trees. Like I said, if they went through your records and realized that you had been arrested for something before, or if you had a bunch of guns, they sent armed officers to your backyard to take your citrus. It was like COVID. It was like the pre-COVID. They must have been practicing for COVID or something like.
It's COVID for oranges, those fuckers.
Yep.
And that's why we can't get good OJ.
Another big part of the whole citrus conspiracy is the financial markets that look at these things and invest in the commodities. So in commodities trading, if you've got a report that comes back that says it's going to be a cold winter or whatever, they can then manipulate the market to influence the price of orange juice and all the rest of this stuff. So
Eddie Murphy trading places, the orange frozen juice.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that was a movie by one of these big truthers who was actually friends with one of these Rockefellers. That was, so he was kind of open the books.
The caricature of the two brothers is exactly that.
Right. So they use stuff like, these infections and all the rest of this stuff to manipulate prices and then, come back with a much bigger haul when really it's all just contrived.
Yeah.
But I wonder, have you actually seen any sign of any disease? Is it real?
Well, that's the interesting thing, Ricardo, is what most people's issue with it. Again, I'm not an orange grower. I know they're dealing with a lot of issues, so I'm not acting like there's just a quick fix or anything. But I do know that one of those main issues, I don't know if it's the canker or the greening. I'm kind of an idiot in this whole plant world. Like, I don't know the specifics on this, but I do know there's an issue, and it's caused by two kind of big diseases or afflictions. One of them, at least, is facilitated by like gnats, like a fly. That's like an invasive Chinese gnat that came along with the citrus or something, or they pumped it out like COVID to take away our citrus. I don't know, but I do know.
But do you see anything on the orange itself? Do you see the disease, or is it something that you don't see? That's my question.
Yes, you can see the disease, but the juice is still good. So what's the juice is largely still good. So what's the issue? One of the big issues is that these oranges that are afflicted, they can't sell in the supermarket because they don't look good. That's one of the big issues. So from what I've heard, most of this citrus, you can still drink it. Again, this is not my expertise here, but I know that you can see the affliction.
I'll just show you something.
Go for it.
He's about to bring back a canker orange.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Big canker on it.
Nice.
He's fine to me.
Yeah.
As to your point, Dr. Longo, I think that the United Fruit Company is an excellent source of a rabbit hole if you guys want to look into how that affected things.
Mm-hmm.
Especially attaching to Kennedy. Yeah.
What do you got, Ricardo?
So this is an orange that is already well past its time because it's end of the season. So they are getting kind of squishy, but the juice is still sweet. They're still good, but they don't look good. Okay. Yep. But the disease that we could call it like that, this is also from lemon trees here in the field. You can see those black dots.
Right.
So those are eggs from insects, but they don't penetrate the cover of the fruit. They don't reach the inside. They just stay there. So when you want to do juice, you just scrub it up underwater and they all fall out. Mm-hmm. But there is some problem that is a fruit, kind of a bug that bites the orange, and then it starts to rot around that point. It gets slightly discolorated in terms of the peeling of the I don't know how to call the crust of the fruit. I don't know the name. The rind. Okay, sorry. Thank you. But that's it. There's years that it happens a lot, and there's years it doesn't happen, and that's just it. I just find it very curious that they find the need to rip them off. It sounds like something else is going on. It's just not.
That's what I'm saying. It's got to be something else, and they're just trying to keep the good OJ all for the Rockefeller families.
Yeah, 100%. And also another part of this conspiracy is, where's the orange juice? You go to the store, it's all yellow juice.
That's
Okay.
what I'm saying.
When you fresh, and yes, there
That's a
are
good point.
different species of orange. Yes, that some will come out more pink, some will come out more orange. But when you take 50 oranges, it doesn't matter how light they are. It's going to come out really orange, right? It's going to come out almost fluorescent orange. But when you bottle orange juice and leave it for a long time, 2 weeks or so, it turns yellow. It loses that deep orange. And orange juice, it almost has like a slight viscosity to it. It's almost like mucusy. When it's fresh squeezed, it's I don't know how to say it. It's like slippery. But when you store it for longer, the sugars in it kind of convert. And a big part of this is the pasteurization process. So most people fresh squeeze their orange juice and it's gone. They drink it that day or whatever. But when you store it for 2 weeks or pasteurize it, you speed up that process, pasteurizing. It turns yellow and it turns chalky. So I've become so much of a diva, like a orange juice diva. I can't even taste the store-bought stuff. Doesn't always cut it because I can taste.
Yeah, because it tastes like shit.
Look,
Yeah.
We squeeze lemon juice here for a meal. You make 1 liter or 2 liters of it for a meal. And at the end of the day, no one will drink it.
Yeah.
So you're talking about 2 weeks. Something has to be done to the juice because at the end of the day, after 6 hours, you can no longer drink that juice. It's no longer, it has metabolized. Something chemical happened. But
Right.
one advice that I give to people that buy those bottles is if they don't have a residue at the bottom, if those crystallized elements in the fruit, if they don't fall to the bottom on the shelf, if you don't see a transparent liquid on most of the bottle, and then that concentrated dark area at the bottom, it's not natural juice at all, because that's what happens. It starts, all the sugars, all the crystals start sinking in, and the liquid gets transparent, and you only had that residue at the bottom. You have to shake it, and then you have your orange juice again. But 2 weeks, not a chance. It has to do something to the juice in order for it to take that long.
Great point, Ricardo. And that's even just a testament to how great the orange is, because even the 2-week-old store-bought stuff, people are super happy to drink. That's still like the lifeblood of the American breakfast. Yes, there's coffee, but people don't think of coffee as nutrition, do you? Right. It's almost like
it's a drug.
Yeah. It's isn't it?
No, it is. I see Nick shaking his head. No, it is classified as a drug. It has influence on the body, therefore is a drug, like any medicine or a recreational
And it's
drug.
addictive. I mean, if you go a couple days without it, you're gonna have a killer ass migraine. Some people do coffee enemas and they put that stuff up their beehole. That is crazy.
They
You
say
want to
it's-
talk about addiction?
They say that's one of the best ways to detoxify your
Listen,
liver,
guys.
actually.
Just wait till you try an orange juice. And just kidding. Never done.
I was like, no.
No, just kidding. Never.
Bad idea. Just for everyone listening, very bad idea.
It'll
Too
burn
sour.
your beehole. It'll burn it.
Sour.
Yeah,
All the citrus, right?
too acidic for the beehole.
Oh,
You'll
fuck.
feel like a
I guess
Falcon
that'd
9
kill.
that doesn't take off.
That'll kill all the parasites right there, I suppose. I don't know.
I just
Not medical
think
advice.
there is an agenda against orange juice, and I feel personally violated by it.
What? Oh, you want to go full? You want to go full schizo conspiracy? If you want to let me off my leash here, why are prisoner jumpsuits orange? Why are the Buddhist monks dressed in orange? Why do they shave both their heads to make them look like an orange? Okay. Why in Florida do you get an orange for every single meal when you're in jail? Okay. Why is orange the only fruit that goes to the letter 33 in Pythagorean Freemasonry? Conventional fruit, to my knowledge. Orange. It's one of the few words that doesn't have an exact rhyme to it. You can get close. Origin of humanity, origin. You can tie that in, but So many things like that.
You can inject stuff in that orange without it being seen by anyone.
Yeah. But where I'm going with this is, what was the most famous court case in American history? The O.J. Simpson trial.
Shut up.
That everyone tuned into every single morning at breakfast.
And that was in Florida, right?
O.J., The Simpsons. I don't know. Do with that what you will, but there's something to Orange.
Hell yeah.
Agent Orange. Yeah. Good.
Well, I believe one of the distinguishing health factors of oranges and citrus is that they are among the only acidic foods that will actually bring our body into a more balanced pH. And so it's the only acidic food that you can eat that actually reverses acidity.
Yeah, citrus. Yeah. I think most citruses do that. Yeah,
they become alkaline once they are metabolized. So
yes,
that's why it's the only. Yeah, that's curious. I never thought of that. It's one of the few things that can be also energy productive because it's acidic. So you can put two copper pins, an iron pin and a copper pin in an orange or a lemon, and you produce 1 volt, 1.7 volts. And I think my maximum was 1.7, but normally from 0.8 to 1.2, you can get from an orange, more from a lemon because it's more acidic, although it becomes more alkaline afterwards, but it's just curious. So it has those two aspects. It can be both one thing and the other. It's interesting. I never thought about that. And I have lots of orange trees.
Yeah.
Speaking of another drink from Florida, have you ever heard the black drink?
That's one of my favorite topics, actually. Yeah.
Let's go.
The black drink. What is Coca-Cola, guys? It's the most famous beverage in the world, next to water. Coca-Cola.
Well, in India is to clean chrome. That's what they use it for.
Yeah.
Well, it's delicious regardless.
So, some people say, oh, it's like you can clean a drain with it. It's so bad for you. It's like, hang on. Wouldn't that clean your drain, your pipes? Maybe not. But there's something to Coca-Cola. Number one, you've got the CC. Coca-Cola 33. You got the black and the red. You got the whole, Templar color scheme. But what's the esoteric origins of Coca-Cola? The ancient indigenous people of Florida, including the Timucua, the tribe we were talking about earlier at Jekyll Island, what would they drink? What was their morning beverage of choice? There was a ton of Florida spring water. And by the way, those Indians, they lived to about 350 years old. Biblical lifespans in Florida 500 years ago. The French recorded Indians that claimed to be and looked to be 350 years old. And we're not talking lunar years, okay? We're talking solar years. These guys looked like 3 times older than a 100-year-old person, but can still walk and talk, right? I don't know if we've ever seen age like that. People are almost, according to what I've heard from legends, people start to look like trees.
How old were they again? In the 300s or something you were saying?
Yep, 350 years old. The chiefs of the Timucua. This is not just like a wild claim. It's the inspiration and the basis for the whole Fountain of Youth myth in Florida. Why did the Europeans think the Fountain of Youth was in Florida? Well, the Indians lived to like 300 years old. Those guys went extinct, the Timucua, but their closest living descendants are the Seminole Indians of Florida. They're still alive today. They're the last group of Indians in America, North America, to be living as wild Indians right up until the present day. They're the last group of really wild Indians. Right up until the 60s, they were living barefoot out in the Florida Everglades, catching alligators. They dance with alligators, train them and stuff like that.
Yeah, those are the people that are collecting Social Security that Trump is going on about.
They're also one of the richest groups, recognized tribes in America. the Seminole Indians. They're the first Indians to start the whole casino thing.
I do
Indians and casinos, that's the Seminole Indians. What's anomalous about them? They average above 6 feet tall, and they live to about 100 years consistently.
Do they
Their
have
bones
red
are
hair?
their bones are different. Their bones are like actually denser. Like there's a
Yes.
whole thing with their skeletal structure.
Yes, they are different.
Weird.
They're very different. So the point I'm making here is the Seminole Indians are the ones who we coexist with today. That's 500 years of mixing, taking in our culture. What's the word? When you acquiesce to a new country, or, the people.
Gentrification.
Well, yeah, all the titles, all the names for it, they're mixing, they're mingling their culture, their DNA. So whatever we know about them today is kind of like the diet, watered down version of back then when they were more pure. And that's not to take away from them today. I'm saying 500 years ago, if they're averaging over 6 feet, like 6'4" today, and they live to 100 years, and that's with all the admixture of European DNA, assimilation. Thank you. That's the word. Thank you, commenters. With all the assimilation, they're eating our food now. They mix with us, 500 years later, they're still well above the average height, and they still live well beyond the normal life expectancy. That's clear, direct, corroborating evidence for the reports we heard 500 years ago, where they were saying these guys aren't just 6.5 feet tall and 100 years old. And the Indians they were meeting 500 years ago in Florida were 8 feet tall and lived 300 years old. And if you wind that back even farther, you end up at the Bible with even older age people and taller people. So, this all kind of narrows down in on Florida.
And
But
this
the
black drink's like totally full of caffeine, right? It's like
Yeah.
so much it makes people pass out.
So what's the black drink the Indians are drinking? They used to make a concoction, a brew, out of what's called Yopon holly. Yopon holly. It's these little red berries in a fern, and it grows all over a lot of Florida and a little bit of the southeast United States. Believe it or not, that was like the most prized commodity in ancient America. There was tribes west of the Mississippi who wouldn't do their sacred ceremonies unless they had a batch of the black drink from Florida. You couldn't get it in the West. You couldn't get it in the Northeast. They would trade their finest goods. The Mississippian culture, like the Aztecs of America, pretty much, they would trade far and wide to get this black drink from Florida. And that was like the principal sacrament of the Mississippian culture. And most of their fine goods were revolved around the ritualistic use of this black drink. At a weak dose, it was like Coca-Cola or a cup of coffee, somewhere in between there. At a strong dose, this is like a DMT trip. You're out. You throw up, and you are gonzo.
Damn.
You're out in the DMT realm. Okay, something like that. It's that potent. So they would drink it every single morning. All the Indians in Florida.
Just
Now-
tripping
why not?
balls for breakfast.
Well, when they drink it in the morning, it would just be the caffeine boost that they wanted. But at the end of the day, or once a month on the full moon or their ceremonies, then they would brew it into the darkest brew that they could, the most concentrated brew. They would dose up with that, and they would be blitzed. And that's where they would commune with the gods, and their shamans would, writhe around and crack all their bones like the Exorcist girl. And there's depictions of this. So that drink, and when the white people moved to Florida, in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. That was the morning beverage of choice for all the European settlers up until they made it illegal to harvest and use, and it's heavily restricted.
It's dangerous for you.
Today we're starting to see products that are made out of yopon, and the stigma and the taboos kind of going away. People don't even know what it is anymore, right? but yopon holly now, it's coming back into the mainstream a little bit. You can find it at Whole Foods. You can find like a little yopon kombucha or yopon tea, bags of yopon tea. But it was heavily restricted for a little while.
I just want to say it's fascinating.
Have you had it?
I've had it. Yeah, I've had it a very light brew. I haven't tripped balls on it or anything. I've just had
no heroic noise. No heroic dose.
No, just like a tea dose. And in the tea,
Dang, I wanted to know what you saw, man.
Reptilians.
No, but I have had a run-in with one of the bufo toads here in Florida. We have cane toads, swamp toads. They're not the desert toads, but they produce the same chemicals in their poison. And I've told that story on a couple other interviews. I think some people close to me think that's what kind of set me off on this path, or made me commit to it at least, was
You licked the toad?
I didn't lick it. I had the poison squirted into both my eyes.
You are a true gangster. Oh my God.
Yeah.
When I was about 15 years old. It wasn't on purpose. I was being a bad kid. I was kicking toads with my friends, and worse. Sometimes after it rains in Florida, a field or something, there'll be 1,000 toads, right? And
I'd kick those little sandwiches too.
We were little pieces of shit when I was like 15 years old. Now I'm a vegetarian. Now I'm an animal lover. Now now I'm different. But I grew up hunting. I had no regard for. I could care less about the toads. My dad used to buy me BB guns and knives and.
Well, I'm sorry,
whatever.
but plants have feelings too.
Plants have feelings?
Yes. Prove
Is that a grown man worried about hurting a plant's feelings?
Yes, it's true. It's true. They can communicate.
This
You
is
just have to talk
misguided.
sweetly as you eat it. That's all.
I'm sorry,
You just gotta be
Ricardo.
like-
That's misguided. When you eat a fruit, you know as well as I do. When you eat a fruit, you are furthering the life cycle.
No. The fruit, I retract. In regards to fruit, yes, they produce it to be taken, to be spread. That's absolutely correct.
Now, what about a potato? If I eat 90% of the potato and then put that little 10% back in the ground, I'm going to get 10 more potatoes, aren't I?
Sure. But potatoes
So it's not
are
just
tuberculous, not a plant.
Well, what plant do you know really doesn't want to get eaten?
Well, spinach, all those kinds of plants.
Spinach?
Yes, for instance, it's a plant.
It's delicious in Cobb
Yes,
salad.
and I do eat it, but that's because I also eat meat, because I'm hurting both of them. But look, this is an ideology that doesn't bear footing in here, and we'll never agree on that.
I mean, it's pretty much nonsense to be. That's the easiest way to put it. Is there's no consideration needed for the feelings of plants. Plants, they might let out a little burst of energy or something. There is no device on earth that can convince me a plant is displaying emotion. Now, there's plants that close when you touch them and open when you leave them alone.
And those that dance when they hear music.
Tremendous. Terrence McKenna, who went in and out of vegetarianism, he said he didn't eat plants because they were so intelligent. Now, I can respect that, but it's very misguided. It's like in the Garden of Eden, God created fruit and herb bearing seed. So right there we have the clear instruction of what mankind should be eating.
Yeah, but the guy that offered the fruits of the land was the guy that was offering the wrong thing.
You're talking about Cain and Abel?
Yeah. He rejected his offer.
It's a good point. Now, what was God's commandment when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden?
You tell me.
To till the ground.
Sure.
He tweaked the seasons, and he said, now you're not just going to be able to live in the Garden of Eden. You can't just pluck fruit off the tree. Now you have to work the ground. So when God rejects Cain's offering, he's not rejecting it because it's a vegetarian. And by the way, the offering has no bearing on the diet. God was disappointed in the offering because it was a lazy offering. Adam and Eve could have offered a basket of fruit. Abel fulfilled God's commandment to go and till the ground and to work with animals, agriculture. So Cain was lazy. Abel partook of industry. That's what God was happy about. Now, I'll point out to you, Ricardo, Cain was a vegetarian. The first murderer was a vegetarian.
I was going to say that.
Abel was also a vegetarian. The first murder victim was a vegetarian. Every human on planet Earth, at least of Noah's lineage, was a vegetarian until Noah gets off the ark. So Cain and Abel, God could care less about their diet. The crime that was committed, the offering, has nothing to do with diet. So I think you're misguided on that one too.
Sure. There's always that chance, but I think that's the first time that God shows his unfairness, because they're both offering from the heart. If you read it, there's no difference in the emotion of one offering and the other offering. So there's no reason for it to be rejected because they both were from the heart. But I think that's not the subject of tonight's talk.
I had something to throw in. So back to the plants as sort of medicine. There's a large percentage of Native Americans who used to use sassafras as a way of getting to higher states. So they would use sassafras and some sort of MEO inhibitor, like a pepper, to shut down their liver and have that sassafras go directly into their bloodstream, which creates ecstasy effect. So that was a very common one. And we've got all these plants all around us that we just assume are just shrubbery. They're just,
what's
that's
sassafras?
Sassafras is a plant.
That's where we get root beer, right?
Like a twig?
Yeah.
It comes. Go ahead.
It's a root.
Ricardo,
It's a root.
to the point about the plants or not. Cain and Abel, you bring up a really good point. It's exactly where we should be looking at to get more guidance on a diet. Cain and Abel, both vegetarians. That's established. Pretty much every scholar will concur, because it's not until Noah where we get an explicit commandment. Now you guys can start eating meat. Now you guys can start eating flesh. Up until that time, meat means fruit and herb bearing seed. The key point being fruit and herb bearing seed. Anything that bears seed is good for us to eat. No worry whatsoever of hurting their feelings. Now,
sure, you get the seed.
Potato does not bear seeds. So there's entire classes of plant life that don't bear seeds that we also do not have to worry about hurting their feelings.
Yeah, I agree with you. Everything that is a tuberculous, everything that is a fruit, everything that is a seed, all of that, I agree with you. But now, when you go to specific... Go on.
The biblical definition of adrenochrome is laid out in the exact chapter that you're referencing. Cain and Abel is where we get the biblical background for adrenochrome. So if there's any place that we should be really looking out for emotion being transferred from the eater to the thing being eaten, I would really agree with you that we should be looking at Cain and Abel, because it's there where we get the biblical explanation of adrenochrome. When Cain slays Abel, vegetarian killing a vegetarian, his blood drips down into the ground. And God doesn't see this happen. He doesn't hear it happen.
No, the blood calls from the land. Yes.
He tastes the blood drip into the ground, and he hears the screams in the blood that's sunk into the ground. If that's not a 101 on adrenochrome, I don't know what is. Now, we can say that plants have feelings, but we can also do our 1000% best to steer clear of adrenochrome. And I would remind you, Ricardo, no matter how you treat your animal, at the moment of slaughter, you are eating diet adrenochrome.
Adrenochrome, no doubt.
All mammals produce adrenaline, and adrenaline is oxygenated no matter what species. Animals produce adrenaline.
Good point. I agree with you. That's true. That's true. By the way, I don't know if you are ending, but I wanted to say, because I was out of network before, you are right. The word in Portuguese for winter and hell is inverno for winter and inferno to hell. So inverno, inferno. It's just one change of one letter, but it's quite similar.
It's almost an inversion. And we can even see the word inversion going back to the exact same root. This might be the first inverted word ever, because inverno, like Ricardo's saying, is winter.
Exactly.
Inferno is hellfire, flames, inferno. Inference, if you have an inference, if you're inverting something, flipping it upside down, that goes back to the same phonetic root. So, good point. Yeah.
Oh. Well, thank you both.
Hey, have you seen this plant before?
Who,
That's
me?
Sassafras right
there we go.
Well,
That's sassafras.
somebody mentioned root beer, and I love the shit out of root beer. So whatever it is,
Guess I've had
God
it
bless. But I did want to say, though, since we're ending, I think there's been so many times that I have name dropped Old World Florida on my show and other shows. I've learned so much. I spent like 2 weeks where I would just try to binge all the videos, and I would fall asleep like trying to stay awake and watch everything. So I was so looking forward to this one. And I hope, because I'm going to share on my end as well, I hope everyone learned something today, because I know I did.
Thank you,
Julia. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all very much for coming on. That was an awesome show. I really had a great time. It was, I don't even think I checked my phone, actually, so I was actually paying attention. Keep it real. Somebody said he looks like he's really stoned, and I was like, no, I'm actually paying attention.
Yes,
concentrated.
Yeah, I was like, I have to listen to this. Thank you.
The next guests are going to look at you and see if you're looking at your phone. So I'm not interesting, right?
Yeah. And unfortunately, I do have another show at 7:30 in 15 minutes, so I do have to wrap this up.
Don't look at your phone.
But thank you all for coming on. I plugged the rejects at the beginning. Dr. Longo, please just plug yourself again. Let everybody know where they can find your stuff.
Old World Florida YouTube channel, Old World Florida on X, Rumble. We're a little bit on Spotify too, but Instagram. And my brother and I, we run the Dancing Elephant Bookstore here in Palm Beach County, Florida. So if you're in South Florida, everyone's welcome. Everyone here on the panel, and if you're listening, come on into the Dancing Elephant Bookstore. This is the #1 esoteric metaphysical bookstore in Florida. Not just saying that, you can check yourself. We sell crystals. We sell a lot of tarot and things like that too. But
is it online as well? Sorry.
We do have a website,
Okay,
dancingelephant.shop. We have an Instagram, dancing.
I'll go check that out.
The dancing_elephant. We also have a publishing company where we've published two books so far. Hopefully the third will be about the Garden of Eden in Florida. They're called Monad. And the second one is Giordano Bruno, the alchemical tradition.
Nice.
And hopefully the third one will be about the Garden of Eden in Florida. And Ricardo, you brought up the point about multiple gardens of Eden. I don't think we got to tie that up. I wish we could have. But I will say that the whole point of that was there's 4 rivers in Florida. They're on the exact same latitude, not only as Jerusalem and the 2 rivers in the Middle East. If we go even farther east and take it to India and like Tibet over there, I think it's in Tibet. Mount Kailash.
Yes.
Mount Kailash is a sacred place. It's considered the Mount Meru, the like Yggdrasil, Mount Meru of South Asia, Central Asia. I don't know.
It's a gigantic version of Pilot Mountain. It's also a crystal mountain.
Yep, exactly. Some people say it's a pyramid. Some people say it's a spaceship. Some people say you're not allowed to climb it. You're not allowed to climb.
I've talked with people that actually went 2 expeditions there to try and find an entrance to the undergrounds, but it's very hard to reach and not as easy as it seems.
Yeah. That Mount Meru, everyone can go check for themselves. Drop a pin on Mount Meru. It's got the legend behind, sorry, not Mount Meru, Mount Kailash. The legend behind Mount Kailash is that it has 4 sacred rivers coming from that mountain. 4 sacred rivers.
Are you aware of the Catalan Atlas?
No, but the point I wanted, I'm sorry,
the
point I wanted to make on that, the point I want to make on that is Mount Kailash is precisely on the 31st latitude.
On the 31st, yes.
Precisely. So you asked about multiple paradises.
Yeah.
There might have been similar stories that took place on that parallel. Florida might have been one Garden of Eden. Mount Kailash might have been something close, something similar, And Heidi, your point about the Mormon church coming to Florida, it's true. They're the largest private landowner. But so much so that this whole Garden of Eden theory, the guy who owned that Garden of Eden in the 50s sold it to the richest man in America in 1955. Richest man in America named John Klug. John Klug donated the Garden of Eden in Florida to the Mormon church. They owned it for about 10 years, then they got rid of it. But to this day, they're still the largest private landowner in Florida. Scientology is headquartered here. Florida's the first place that Christianity came to the United States officially. First place that the Greek Orthodox Church came. First place that Judaism came. First place that Islam came.
All a coincidence.
Right?
But that's my last point. So I hope that covers
amazing.
anything to cover.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Dr. Thank
love
you.
it.
Oh yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody in the chat too. I was able to see everybody's streams. There was a lot of awesome stuff being said. I tried to throw up stuff from old shows. Thank you for being so interactive. That's what's up. That's why I like to go live. And yeah, that's the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.
Thank you guys.
Hell yeah.